I want to welcome everyone to Women's League Reads. It's a member benefit program of Women's League, and we reach across the United States, Canada, and Israel. So we're very proud of this program. I'm Vivian Lieber, the chair of Women's League Reads of our virtual book club and vice president of Women's League. We're delighted to have a conversation, if we can, with author Goldie Goldbloom. She has notified me by text message that she is hovering in a bathroom with her children to protect herself from a tornado that is ripping through her area, which is very frightening. And I hope she's safe and well. And she will join us later. She says it's a fast moving weather system and hopefully she will be able to join us. Her book is delightful. On Division is a novel that has been received many awards and honors, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. So this session is being recorded. It's being live streamed on Facebook. It'll be available later for viewing, and we'll have a book discussion. But first, I'd like to bring back Debbie Goldich, our convention chair and incoming international president, to say a few words.
Thank you. So the first thing I'd like to say is thank you to Vivian for running an amazing program over the last 3 years. I know that all of you have gotten to know her and she's more than capable and has done a great job. And if you like the work Vivian's done, then look for her in the new administration. She has a great job where she's going to be able to showcase her skills there. So thank you, Vivian, for saying yes. I wanted to introduce the next chairs of Women's League Reads, and it's Merrill Karras of Nashua, New Hampshire from the North Atlantic region, and she's co-chairing with Susan Farber from Cincinnati, Ohio, from Central Great Lakes region. So thank you so much to Merrill and Susan for stepping up and saying yes, and we look forward to Women's League Reads with held by the two of you. Thank you so much.
I'd also like to acknowledge that Margie Miller has been wonderful too in encouraging me first to accept the position, and also has just been a wonderful leader. And we're not going to say goodbye. She's going to be with us. She's also in my region, so she's never failed to participate in our region programs as well whenever she was able. So hats off to Margie, hats off to you, Debbie, and mazel tov and good luck.
Thank you.
So I'm going to proceed before we discuss the book, in introducing the author in absentia, because we need to know a little bit about her. Goldie Goldbloom was born and raised in Australia, where she began her writing career, and her work there was selected for the Best Australian Short Stories collection. She now is a Chicagoan. Her first novel, The Paper Bark Shoe, was named Best Novel of the Year by Indie Fab and won the award from the Association of Writers for Best Novel. She also has authored 2 short story collections and many essays. She received an NEA, that's National, I'm sorry, does anyone know what NEA is? I forgot. An NEA fellowship, several other fellowship posts, and was awarded the Jerusalem Post Prize, among other awards. Yes,
It's
Susan.
the National Education
NEA,
Association.
National
Education Association.
Endowment for the Arts.
Oh,
Okay.
okay.
Endowment of the Arts, for the Arts, yes. Thank you very much. She has held many fellowships and was also awarded the Jerusalem Post Prize. She teaches creative writing as an assistant professor at Northwestern University and is also taught at the University of Chicago. She also has many speaking engagements. The Association of Jewish Libraries has named On Division its best fiction title, an award to be conferred this summer, this month, at its annual conference, now to be held virtually, which Rachel Kamen is also very involved with. Ms. Goldbloom is a Hasidic Lubavitcher and a single mother of 8 children. She also is an advocate for LGBTQ youth from observant Jewish backgrounds. This new novel, On Division, was published in the fall of 2019 by Farrar, Straus, and Giroux. Its setting is Williamsburg, Brooklyn in the 2000s, where the author had once lived. The title refers to an actual street there, Division Avenue, and it's also serves as a metaphor in the story. Ms. Goldbloom was scheduled to be part of the authors panel at the Women's League Convention this July, and unfortunately a little virus got in our way. So we're really grateful that we may still hear from her today if she can overcome the weather system that is passing through her area right now. At convention, Rachel Kamen was to be the moderator of a 3-author panel that Ms. Goldbloom was to be part of. And I'm very pleased that she's with us today. And Rachel is the director of the Joseph and May Gray Cultural and Learning Center at North Suburban Synagogue, Bethel in Highland Park, Illinois. She is also a member of the Association of Jewish Libraries Fiction Award Committee, and she facilitates a number of book groups. In fact, she had earlier hosted Goldie for a book discussion. So therefore, I've invited Rachel to join me in talking about and discussing the book, hopefully with the author as well. So I'd love to get underway. I posted discussion questions in the past week, and I hope those of you who are members of Women's League Reads had a chance to look at some of those. And now I'd like to open it. I think I'm going to throw the ball into Rachel Kamen's court for the first point about the book that we might focus on. It has so many elements to it.
Okay, I'm sorry, Vivian, I didn't see your questions. So do we want to start with the questions you posted, or?
Well, the questions, yes, we can do that, because the questions that I had for the author are really very much for the author. So
you're talking about the questions for the author. Okay.
Yeah,
well,
there's a little of both.
I can share a list also. So, there's been a lot of books published recently about the ultra-Orthodox community, but most of them are what they call off the derech books, people who have left the community. So there's been several memoirs, and I have a list that I can share in the chat. And one of the ones that's been getting the most buzz recently is the memoir Unorthodox by Deborah Feldman. And then also there's a sequel called Exodus. And then that was made into the 4-part Netflix series. And then there were several other memoirs. There's one called All Who Go Do Not Return by Shulam Dean, which is about a man who leaves the community. And then several other novels as well. And I think when I read On Division, and my colleagues on the Association of Jewish Libraries Fiction Award Committee felt the same way, it was really the first time that I had read a book about the ultra-Orthodox community that was written by an insider who had not left the community. All of the books that have come out recently about the ultra-Orthodox community were either by people who were outsiders or people who had left. And so I think that, kind of slants and colors both the fiction and the memoir. So what made On Division so different and unique, I think, was because Goldie is an insider, and she's still a part of the community. And she was able to portray the community, warts and all, but also portray the warmth and the love and the benefits of being part of such an insular community. So, and one of the things too that, just in case, I know Vivian alluded to it, but a little bit about Williamsburg, which is in Brooklyn, and it's an eclectic mix of demographics with different ethnic groups forming pockets throughout the area. And there's enclaves of Italians and Puerto Ricans and Poles and Dominicans, and then of course a large population of Hasidic Jews. there's over 75,000 Hasidic Jews that live in Williamsburg. And it's the headquarters of one faction of the Satmar Hasidic group. And that's the group that's portrayed in Deborah Feldman's work. And the Hasidic Jews live mainly in the area south of Division Avenue, which is where Goldie got the title for the book. But in the past 30 years, Williamsburg has undergone gentrification, and it has become known for its art scene and hipster culture. So with so many cultures inhabiting a small area, it's not surprising that there's occasional clashes, which Suri, the character in the novel, refers to. So I guess the first thing, if those of you that have read the book, you know, the premise of the book is that Suri is a 57-year-old grandmother. She's about to become a great-grandmother. And as the book opens, she has just learned that she is pregnant with twins. So, you know, that's the first thing to discuss is like, what was Suri's reaction to the midwife's news? What are her concerns about the pregnancy? And why is she worried that this pregnancy is going to bring shame on her family? So I don't know, Vivian, what do you think is the best way with such a big group? Should we do the raise?
Yes, I think there is a function at the bottom of the screen that you can click on where it says participants, and then it gives you the option when you find your name of raising your hand. That's why you can just write in the chat box.
And if you
You
want,
can
I
also
can
write in the chat
facilitate.
box. Rabbi?
I can facilitate looking too. Barbara Ezring and I, maybe? Okay.
Okay. So
And
till we-
also, people can unmute themselves because the new version of Zoom, you can't actually, I can't unmute you. You have to unmute yourself anyhow. So,
Can I give you a little help? At the bottom of the screen, there's something that says reaction. And if you
that's
click
what
on
we just
reaction,
said.
the hand will come up. Press the hand, it'll come right up on the picture.
Right, that's what we said. On the very bottom, there's a reaction. No one has actually raised their hands yet.
Okay, well, let me just say that Suri I found to be, and all the other characters, very real, vivid. They weren't none of them were but one-dimensional. So you kind of go on a journey with her through this pregnancy. The book begins with her very beginning of her pregnancy and her reaction to it, right through the ending and the after effects of the pregnancy. And she is so conflicted about it. She feels good about the pregnancy on many levels, but she keeps it a secret. So the keeping of secrets is a big part of the novel. And we're at first puzzled why she keeps it a secret, but I think we learn that it's in part a way she gains power through holding her secret, even from her husband. And does anyone else have a
Yeah,
a
Susan
comment?
from Cincinnati raised her hand, and then there are two comments in the chat. So Susan, you can, from Cincinnati, you can unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you, Rabbi.
Sure.
In retrospect to Rachel's comment about what is Suri's reaction at age 57 to learn of a very late in life double pregnancy, I think because her marriage to Yiddle and their very tender relationship with each other, the way I see it, with my daughter being in the Orthodox movement, and from what I understand of the process of in the Orthodox world, maybe even in the Hasidic Satmar world, my daughter knows a few people in that world too. The idea that you get introduced to someone and within like 5 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks tops, you've decided you're going to get married or not. You really don't have a long time to develop the sexual affinity and tenderness. You know, it takes a long time to develop that. And yes, Yiddle and Suri is described as developing it over the decades of their marriage, and they probably had it, it's described as they had it from the very beginning. But that's like an atypical marriage, perhaps in an Orthodox world, because I think people are expected to come together and connect more because of family, prestige, economics, those kind of issues, and sense of loyalty that you're both agreeing to live this life that's prescribed, that's very structured a certain way, that appeals to certain people. That's why I think my daughter really likes the structure of a traditional Orthodox life. That's
Yeah, I
what
mean,
drew
Susan
her to
brings up an interesting point about the marriage between Suri and Yiddle. And, you know, again, maybe on most of our limited knowledge, it would seem that maybe it's not such a typical marriage in the community, but they do have a very loving relationship. And it is a nice marriage, you know, it is a nice relationship, probably because they've been married for so long. I think it says she was 17 or 18 when she married him.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, they were very young, and he was a few years older. And the thing is, though, Rachel, I'm sorry to butt in, to interrupt, but the point I wanted to make is I think at 57, to be pregnant, most women anticipate when they're 57 and grandparents in the Orthodox world, they're past their prime to become pregnant. They're probably past their time of having loving relationships with their spouse. And so she's probably embarrassed that this is revealing more about her marriage to Yiddle than the community is comfortable realizing.
and
I think
yeah, and that's
part of
exactly
it.
that is in the book, that it is an advertisement that they're still having sexual relationships. But also the interesting thing that is brought up is that in the book, Goldie writes, you know, such recklessness, they would think. Didn't that poor excuse for a mother fear for the health of those new children? Why take unnecessary risks? And that's because, you know, and I hadn't known this, but in the Orthodox community, there's really a fear of Down syndrome, and the thought that Down syndrome increases with, you know, the chances of having a child with Down syndrome increases with a late in life pregnancy. So, you know, she writes, what kind of mother would bring a damaged child into the world if she could prevent it by exercising a little self-control? And such children, damaged children, would cause terrible problems for their older siblings. When it came time to get married, their family would be marked. So, you know, to get pregnant at an advanced an advanced maternal age would show that you're reckless, because your chances of having a child that has some sort of, you know, birth defect or issue. The other thing that was interesting, which comes up with another side plot of the book, is that she has this fear that everyone would think she was covering up for a granddaughter's illegitimate pregnancy by pretending that the babies were hers. So that's another thing that happened. So like people wouldn't believe her that she was pregnant. And these are all these are all Suri's interior thoughts. These are the thoughts that she has, because I think that shows maybe what would be going through her head if this had happened to somebody else. You know, this is what she would think of a neighbor or friend. And then it really is a miracle, because it's not just that she's 57. We learn in the novel that she's already hit menopause, and she also is a breast cancer survivor. So she really didn't think that it was like physically, humanly possible for her to get pregnant anymore. Her youngest child is, I think, 13.
And she had 10 children.
And she had 10 children. So I think, you know, and then as Vivian alluded to, is like, and somebody else asked in the chat, wait, I want to make sure we see, there were some good comments. Yeah, so Molly Ann said the same thing I was thinking, you know, that showing you know, being pregnant is advertising that you're still having sexual relations with her husband. And also it's difficult for her children and grandchildren to get wedding matches. And remember too, we can talk about the other plot, is that her family has already been marked, so to speak, because of her son Lipa, which plays a very important role. And then, Yep, she was embarrassed. Jeanette, yep, somebody else said it. And then it's interesting, this was a question, Molly Ann asked this question, and this is something we can also talk about, how realistic is it that her husband never knows she's pregnant? And that's one of those questions of like, does he know or doesn't he know? You know, because the one thing we learn is her mother-in-law, who's blind, figures it out right away, right? Her
Yes,
mother-in-law
it's a
figures it out right
fabulous,
away.
Little sequence in the novel where her mother-in-law, who I'm going to quote exactly what she said. Though she's blind, she's the only one that sees the pregnancy. So, quote, I may be blind, but I'm not so blind that I cannot see, she says. The eyes are useless unless when the mind is blind. So she's very close to Suri, and she's sympathetic with her, and she's very much loved and respected within the family. She's the great-grandmother who is the matriarch, and she's originally from Hungary, so she has a title called, it confused me in the beginning, called Dead Anya, which is simply a translation from the Hungarian for great-grandmother, and it's an honorific. And Rabbi, you know more about that?
No, I was going to tell you three things. One, Maddie Gimbel had her hand up. Two, there was a lot of chat comments, and the author is with us. So it's really exciting.
Fabulous.
So you might
glad.
still want to read the comments in the chat out loud and see if Maddie wants to still speak, and give our author a breather for a second. And we're really excited that you're with us.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah,
Okay, we'll hear from Maddie a little, and then I'll reintroduce Goldie briefly.
And Maddie, you can unmute yourself.
I did.
Oh, okay, great. Okay.
The sense I got when I read this book, and I loved it, was her orthodoxy was such a part of her. My feeling was that her pregnancy was God's plan. And that was enough for her.
No, and that's a great, and I think that, and we can talk about this further, but you know, that's a huge theme in the book, is like why she can't tell her husband. You know, what's really going on there, in terms of why she can't tell him or can't tell him yet. Because my reaction as a reader was, you'd think like, this is a miracle. This pregnancy is an absolute miracle. And you know, when we just think about, like, it reminded me of the story of, you know, of Sarah, you know, having a baby at, Rabbi, how old is Sarah in the Bible, supposedly, when she has
90.
90, you know, that this is like, you know, that you would think that the reaction would be like, oh my gosh, this is God's will. This is a miracle. This is the most amazing thing. You know, Suri must be, you know, like Sarah, the matriarch. And so why wasn't this looked upon in that way? And so I think there's a lot of indications in the book of why, you know, why Suri can't tell him. And I think Diane brought up a comment in the chat. That was one of the moments in the book that you chuckled to yourself, that Suri was a bigger woman, and her daughter or granddaughter is bringing her Weight Watchers brochures. You know, they think that she's gaining weight, and they're like, you got to take care of yourself, you know, so that also made it, you know, maybe easier for her to hide the pregnancy, in that no one expected it. But that was
there's a lot of bits of humor, but I would like now, I'm very honored to introduce Goldie. Can you please unmute yourself, Goldie, and say hello?
Hello,
so
everybody.
I find you.
Hello, I'm so sorry that I'm late, but there was a tornado went over the top of my house. Woo.
Oh no, everyone's okay? The house is okay?
Everyone's okay. We're sort of in a valley, and so it skipped from one side of the mountain to the other side and went over us, but we could hear it and see it, and it was terrifying. So my apologies that we were hiding.
Correct? You're currently in Wisconsin, not Illinois, correct?
Yes, I'm currently in Wisconsin.
Okay.
Yes, you run away and then it comes right after you, the storm.
Wow. So I'm so
Well,
grateful that you joined us despite everything. While
Well, thank you so much for the invitation.
we already introduced you, your background, and we started to discuss the book. So now we're want to hear all the rest. We were talking about Suri, and she's such a beautifully drawn character. In fact, the whole book, let me just say, I love your writing style. Your sentences are sparse, they're short. You don't use a lot of 5-syllable words. You write in a way that our attention is drawn to the emotion and the meaning and not flourishes. So it's a beautiful writing style, and through it, we see characters who are very believable. Suri with her secrets, and her husband Yiddle is, with his pluses and minuses, is a lovable character. We have so many others, they are multidimensional. So I wanted to ask you whether Suri is a woman you have known in your life. Is she sort of a amalgam of some of the women you've known, and her tendency to try to keep secrets and keep a bit of her individuality and having secret dreams that she wants to fulfill? Tell us about that.
You know, I think there are characters in the book who definitely are amalgams of other people, but Suri, I feel like, is representative of many aspects of being a woman age. And not just like an Orthodox woman, a Hasidic woman, but any woman really who's been, especially somebody who's been in a relationship for a long time with their husband. And I just kind of, I think that there's so many commonalities between, you know, sort of any woman who's out there and the Hasidic woman, because, you know, people sort of look from the outside and they say, oh, you know, Hasidic women, oh, they must be this, that, and the other thing. But actually, Hasidic women are really just like you. They have the same fears. They have the same hopes. They like really, they want to connect, to love and be loved just the same way as everybody else does. And so I think that many of the aspects of her internal world, not all, but many, are really similar to other people, you know, to all of yours and to mine and to everybody's. And so she is a character that I didn't actually base on somebody that I knew, but, you know, there are little elements from this person and that person, but mostly she's herself. Suri is herself.
We spoke earlier of her secret keeping and how it did give her a little bit of a sense of power. Mm-hmm. And she found that she didn't even understand herself why she was having such trouble letting it out. But it was also wrapped up in her grief and a little bit of anger with her husband and the community and her daughter too, for not allowing her to express her grief. So tell us about her. Most people on this call have read the book. Maybe some have not completed it yet. But her son Lipa had a secret. He was a young man who was gay, and he was keeping it. He didn't keep it from his family. He told his parents, and he also escaped to the Manhattan to lead a second life. And the father, Yiddle, he said at one point, why couldn't he just keep it a secret? So it came to a very bad ending for him. He ran away, and his premature death was a huge hurt that Suri couldn't deal with because this community wouldn't let her deal with it. So that it touches on why she's keeping her pregnancy a secret as well. You had some insight into how the mind works.
Very connected. It's very connected. Yeah.
So tell us about her grief and her son's struggle and how it might have been better if they had. She also herself said, Suri, if she was hoping if she could do it all over again, she would have been much more forgiving and humane towards her son. So tell us about that struggle with grief that maybe many people have.
So I think in Sari's case, you know, because they're in the Orthodox community, supposedly being gay doesn't exist. In the Hasidic community, not in the Orthodox community. You know, there's that classic interview with the Lubavitch women on Oprah, and she says to them, I want to ask you a question. What would you do if one of your kids came out as gay? And they all get in a fluster, and then they say, oh, there are no gay kids. And then another woman says, no, that's very extreme. And another one says, no, that doesn't happen in our community. It doesn't exist. And then another woman says, it does exist, but we don't talk about it. And that's sort of the attitude. And so in Sari's case, you know, her son has died, but what is she going to say to her community, a community that doesn't acknowledge that Lipa even existed, that, you know, his existence as a young gay kid. And part B of that is he committed suicide. And so another thing that sort of isn't something that's talked about ever in the community. And so, like, how is she going to broach that? You know, she'd go over to her friend and say, man, I'm feeling really sad about my son right now who was gay and committed suicide. It's not a conversation. And so that it's kind of, she's shut down. She's unable to talk about that with her family members or with her friends. There is no language even for it. So there's all this pent up upset and emotion that she can't kind of share with anybody. And so it's this feeling of like this suppressed distress, and it eventually spills over into her other secret where she's like, this is what it's like to keep a secret. She feels like this connection with Lipa and this understanding of what it was like to be him. Like her secret enables her to connect with her son in a way that she couldn't before. No matter how she thought about it, she was unable to understand it. But now that she has her own secret, she's like, aha, oh, that's what it was like. And the fact that she has the secret is like her journey to being able to connect to her son. Even posthumously, she's able to understand him better because of holding her own secret. It's part of the reason she doesn't want to give it up.
So there are ghosts all over the book. She sees the ghost of her son who communicates silently with her, and she holds those green framed glasses of his that everyone objected to close to her at all times. And she sees his ghost. And then at another point, she sees other ghosts approach her. I think when she's in labor, she sees the great grandmother, and they have a message for her. Tell us about how you work in the ghosts in your, I don't know about your other writing, and the meaning of ghosts to in a Jewish framework to our.
Yeah. Well, you lucky listeners are going to hear something that I don't think I've ever said in an interview. Maybe I have, but I don't believe so. So I worked for the Chevra Kadisha for over 20 years, and the Chevra Kadisha prepares the dead for burial. And one of the things that I've noticed over the years is this sense that when you walk into the room where the person is waiting to be prepared for burial, that very often you can feel like a tornado overhead, actually, like a huge thunderstorm overhead. You can feel the physical presence of something in the room. And that's something, for lack of a better word, people sometimes call a ghost or a spirit or something, an energy, right? It's not always there, but it's often there. And if I turn to my teammates after the Tahara, after preparing the body, we sometimes are like, could you feel that? And we're like, yes, we could feel it. And so I don't know that, you know, Judaism really believes in this idea that there's more than meets the eye. There's more than just the physical body, that the soul goes on, that there are souls that stay in the world. There are souls that leave the world. There's there's this movement into the invisible spheres. We believe in that. And, you know, there's a lot of discussion about that in the Jewish text. And I feel strongly that there is, I guess, because of my own experience. And so I wrote what I understand of the world, what I know of the world, into my books. Do I think that somebody can be haunted by people they've wronged, things that haven't gone right in their life? Yes, I do. Whether that's a physical haunting or whether it's a mental haunting, it doesn't matter. So each time in the book, when she's thinking about Lipa, when she's holding back her secrets, we move into that spirit of Lipa. We see him. He's present for her in an almost tangible way.
Yes, thank you. And I also saw that, oh, there's so many questions to ask you. I hope we'll be able to go beyond our slated time already.
I hope so too. I feel so bad.
I hope with our audience. I'll ask one or two more questions and then I'll turn it back to Rachel. It's a we see multiple generations, and Suri, at least 4 generations in the book, from the great-grandparents, then Suri and her husband, and her daughter who lives in the same building with her and her children. And one of those children is Miriam Hannah, who's her favorite grandchild, a girl who is, Suri says, she's too smart for her own good. I've heard that expression somewhere before. She's curious. She wants to learn too. So just as Suri is studying in secret the trade of being a midwife, and she hides from her husband and others what she's really doing when she goes to the hospital, and she's actually studying with a midwife and reading textbooks about midwifery, who the granddaughter, who's about, I think, 13, also reads. And this becomes a very dangerous thing. And her own mother, who's a strictly more from than Suri is, strongly objects. So I want to talk about this. You invest in this grandchild some hope, I think, for the future for women in the community. So with all the constraints that community puts on women and people who are different, I found in the book there are elements of hope. And I want to ask you if you share that in the future for young women, the future for gay people, the future for others who don't 100% fit the track that they're expected to follow.
Yeah. I do think that there's slow change in the Hasidic world. I don't think that it's static in the way that people often think that it is. It isn't. It moves. It moves slower than the outside world. It's about 20, 30 years behind the world, but it continues to move forward. And so, this past Shavuos, I want to say, my community sent me a big cheesecake, and I sort of looked at it and I went, whoa. Because that didn't happen, let's say 10 years ago, but it is happening now. And so I do see change happening, and I did write change into my book because I think that the young people foster that change. I know that many of the kids in my daughter's school, for example, said, we don't care about gay people. We have no feelings about that. We're not upset. It's like, it's fine. Our parents are upset. We don't care. We grew up in America. We were exposed to, we don't care. And so that's the culture changing right there, because when those kids are parents and they're talking to their kids about gay children in the community, it's a very different attitude than the attitude of their parents, let's say. So it does change, like time changes these things. And it's, I guess there's a Yiddish expression, "Azoi kristelt sich, azoi yiddelt sich." The way it goes in the outside world, so too it goes in the Jewish world. And it's true, things do change. And I did write in Miriam Chiena because interestingly enough, the women in the Hasidic community are far better educated than the men. And in fact, many of the Hasidic dynasties have allowed, not the one that I wrote about, but many of the Hasidic dynasties have allowed their women and encouraged them even to get an education because they support their husbands. They're the breadwinners, and the husbands stay in learning, in studying Torah. But the women go and become, you know, physiotherapists, let's say, or something like that.
So, okay, and the tension between many parts of the book, I think you're a strong critic of aspects of the community. We hear about the young girl that Suri encounters at the hospital who's been raped by the therapist she was sent to. And she realizes that her son was sent to this same unlicensed therapist. And when she sees the horror of this child who's pregnant and whose community then rejects the child, is, you know, gripping. But you express a lot of tenderness also for the good qualities of the community, how everyone surrounds you. When the great-grandma, when Opa dies, and how everyone embraces you. And there's that tension between the good and the bad, and I just don't know whether to ask you, I mean, is there a winner on balance? You know, what comes out on top?
I mean, obviously,
what?
Obviously, I made my choice. You know, I still live in the Hasidic community. So if there's balance for me, I chose my community because I really love so many of the aspects of the community. And at the same time, with clear eyes, I have to say that there are things that aren't great. But that's true everywhere, right? Every single place. It doesn't matter what community you're in. It doesn't matter what country you're in. There's always stuff that's really good. And then there's the stuff that after a while of living there, of being part of that community, you're like, oh, yeah, there's that as well. So the thing is, you can't fix there's that as well if you don't talk about it. And so there's so much to really love about the Hasidic community. It's an incredible community, honestly. There's so much positive. And these negative things, thankfully, are finally getting a little airtime so that they can be addressed instead of just swept under the carpet. And I'm happy about that. I think that's great, you know?
Okay, I'd like to give Rachel Kamen another chance to ask some other great questions.
Thank you.
Hi, Goldie.
Hi, Rachel. I love this lady. She's great.
The feeling's mutual. You know, I mentioned at the beginning when we were waiting for you about how there's been a little bit of an explosion of books written about the ultra-Orthodox or Hasidic community. And especially there's been so much buzz around Deborah Feldman's memoir, which got a lot of buzz when it came out in 2012, and then it's gotten more buzz because of the Netflix series. So, and I was explaining to the group how, you know, your book kind of stands out in that, on that bookshelf because, you know, you're an insider and you didn't leave. And most of those books are about people who have left. So can you give us a little bit of insight into like, why do you think there is this fascination with the ultra-Orthodox community, both from, you know, non-Orthodox Jewish readers, but also non-Jewish readers, you know, and how the ultra-Orthodox community has been portrayed in media, accurately, inaccurately?
All right, that's several different questions. So let me see if I can winnow it down. So I do think there's a fascination with people who look different than us. And, you know, right now I'm in an old order Amish area and people drive through and they're like completely fascinated and obsessed. They ask me a million questions. Oh, you live here. What the, you know, what are you thinking? Like, what do these people think? And are they like us? And do they eat? And, you know, like just all kinds of funny questions. And I'm like, yeah, they're just like us. I mean, they're exactly like us. They have the same hopes and fears and wishes and you know, they're exactly the same. People are the same no matter what. But that's, the thing is, like, you know, let's say you were a New Yorker living in New York and you saw a Hasidic woman walking down the street and, you know, she doesn't look like you, and you go up to her and she's not speaking your language and she's got all these kids, and you sort of go, well, that's not me. That's not me. That's not my life. She must be really different. And a lot of people kind of look at Hasidic women and either they're like, well, she must be very saintly. She's a religious person. She must be very, very saintly. Or sometimes they're like, oh, she must be, you know, like one of those terrible people who's religious on the outside, but like poison on the inside. And no, Hasidic women they're just ordinary. They're just the same as you, same inside, with like wishing to be loved, wishing for connection, hoping your kids do okay, afraid that people are going to judge you, the same. You know, it's that same experience. And so I guess one of the things that I really want people to know and that I want people to experience is that those women who are walking along speaking Yiddish in the street and who have all the kids and the head covering and the whole thing are not angels, they're not demons, they're just people. They're just people with the same wishes and wants. And I think it's very easy to other others. And it's interesting because this at this moment right now in time, where there are these, you know, protests everywhere, partially those protests are because people have been othered because of the way they look. And that happens for us Jews, and it happens for other small communities and larger communities throughout the United States and the world. And it never feels good. It doesn't feel good to have people look at the outside of you and say, ah, you must be like this, when we're all the same. Inside, we're all the same. We're all the same. I don't think I answered all your questions, Rachel. You're gonna have to reiterate the second half.
That's okay. Well, do you want to comment about kind of like the other books that On Division kind of gets lumped with, and and how you know, did you approach the subject differently, and how, and you know, kind of what your motivations were? And
sure. While I appreciate very much the work of the people who have left the Hasidic community writing about their experiences, in particular, I want to give a shout out to Shulam Dean, who wrote Those Who Go Do Not Return, because that's just beautifully written. At the same time, all of those experiences are written, like you said earlier, Rachel, from the outside. They're people who were at one point inside the community and have left it. Often they leave it when they're younger, and they leave it with a great degree of bitterness and hurt, pain, very valid pain. And as a result, the descriptions of the internal world are biased a little. They have a flavor, and that's valid. I mean, that was their lived experience. They, you know, they're writing about their own experiences. But in terms of writing about the internal world of the community, what it's like in the community, I feel strongly that the only way to do that is to be in the community, and to know both the good and the bad, and to be able to approach it as neutrally as possible, and to open a window into that. And even small things like the I guess like the knowledge that an older person who's lived in the Hasidic community for a long time has. Younger people who leave don't have that same knowledge. They may be very, very learned, but they don't have the same knowledge or experience. And so I guess in writing the book, it wasn't my main motivation, but I definitely did want to express as accurately as possible what it's like to be in the community without that bias, I guess.
Has your community appreciated this book, and how have they discussed it, or has it been discussed? And or readers, people you're close to, have they received this look into their lives?
I've been actually really thrilled. I didn't think nobody from the Hasidic community ever reads my books. It's as if, you know, they see me walking down the street and they go, "Oh, so Goldie, what do you do to earn a living?" And I sort of go, "I'm a writer," and it disappears. Like the information disappears. They never look it up. They never ask about my books. But this one time, I don't exactly know who was the first person who read it, but somebody read it and they were like, "This is great." And then they put it on the community chat, at least in my community. And all of a sudden everybody read it. And then they were all recommending it to everybody. And so I got all these people calling me up and sending me messages and going, "That was great. You really, you wrote about us. Like it's a real book about us. And it's, by the way, it's really well written." I'm like, "Oh, thanks." I'm so happy I can do that for you. Although, of course, that wasn't my intention. And even within the Satmar community, which is, of course, the community where Suri lives, even within the Satmar community, a lot of women have read the book and really appreciated it and reached out to let me know that they really appreciate it, that they feel seen. And I love that. It makes me really happy the way I wrote the book, it could be read by a Hasidic person without an instantaneous rejection. Because women who read books in the Hasidic community are very careful about what they read. And so I did take a lot of time thinking about what was possible to put in the book and what was not possible. So that's exciting. And I think I told Rachel, and I don't know if any of you heard, but when my family had a shiva in my house in last October, and during the shiva, an elderly woman, a Satmar woman, came into my house and she said to me, "You know, I want to tell you something. I read your book and I loved it." And I was surprised. I said, "Oh, really?" You know, and she said, "Yes, I want you to know that when I was reading it, I was crying and yelling at Suri and very, very expressive." And my husband, so her husband is in his 90s. He's a rabbi and he has never read a secular book. He's never read a novel. I don't know if he speaks English. I think he doesn't. I think he just speaks Yiddish. And she said, her husband said to her, "Will you read me the book? Will you read that book to me?" And it's easy to read that book in translation because I wrote it in Yiddish and then translated it into English. You know, so it's a very easy book to translate back into Yiddish, super easy. And so she said, yes, she's going to read it to her husband. So she started reading it to him and he loved it. This elderly Satmar man, this rabbi, loved it. And they got to the end and he was weeping. And he said to her, "Read it again. Start again at the beginning and read it again." And I thought, there it is. That's success when this elderly rabbi feels the experience. He sees himself in that book and it moves him. That's success for me. I felt like I had reached somebody that I really needed to reach.
That's wonderful. I'm so glad you told us that.
Yeah.
And about the fact that you wrote the book in Yiddish, then you yourself translated it to English, and then
Kind of
back
and forth. I have to say, it was like kind of back and forth. But like any sentence in that book was winnowed down. I think one of you mentioned earlier that it's very simple language. It was you, Vivian? Yeah. It's very simple language. And it was. I kept on cutting words and reducing it to accurately reflect the way you would think if you were thinking constantly in Yiddish. So like when I speak Yiddish, I do think in Yiddish, but my mind is complicated and I shove in a bunch of English words. But I think that, you know, if you're thinking in Yiddish, like the vocabulary is just much smaller. It's instead of, you know, 200,000 words or 1,000,000 words or whatever it is that English is right now, it's way down there. It's like 30,000 words or something. It's a small vocabulary. It's very small.
This is fascinating. I didn't know that. So and you were born in Australia, in a Yiddish-speaking home, I assume? No, from Eastern Europe. Tell us how that happened, your family being in Australia, you coming to America in the Hasidic. What are the origins? Can we have the origin story?
Okay. So, so there's two things. First of all, I became Hasidic when I was very young. Like I was an obsessed little kid, and I was just very determined. I really wanted to be observant, and I became observant. I was just like, this is what I want for myself, and I did it. And in terms of like how did Jews get to Australia, or at least to rural Australia, which is where my family's from, there was this thing called the Friedlander League. And the Friedlander League had this plan to make a new Jewish homeland, to find the new Jewish homeland. This is around the turn of the last century. They wanted to know, okay, where's the new Jewish homeland going to be? Is it going to be in Israel? Nah, we're never going to get it. That was the thought. Maybe it could be in Uganda. And one of the thoughts was maybe it could be in rural outback Western Australia. And the reason that they thought that is because the Jureks, which was the landed gentry in Australia, the Jurek family had donated, or said that they were willing to donate, over 1 million acres of land in the far northwest of Australia to create a new Jewish homeland. They thought, oh, this is going to be a good idea. We'll get all these Jews to come in here, make business, work the land. This is brilliant. And they're nowhere near us. They're all the way far away. And so that was the plan, and there was a lot of support for it. All the different governmental people and the businesses and everybody, everybody was on it. And so my grandfather had been attending agricultural school in London, and he overheard this whole conversation. He's like, that would be very cool to have the new Jewish homeland in Australia. And as we know, the new Jewish homeland is not in Australia. But there are quite a few Jews scattered around rural outback Australia as a result, I think, of this thought that this area of Australia could be the new Jewish homeland.
Excellent. We've never had an author quite like you. This is wonderful.
Vivian, there's some.
No, don't other me.
Vivian, there's some questions in the chat.
Maybe we'll take a few more minutes. Usually we're going to go over because we started with you late. Does anyone, Rachel, do you have another question, or does someone in the audience have a question?
There's some good questions in the chat.
Vivian, I suggest you read the chat and
okay.
There's a question that I would really like to address, and it says, what would you have put in the book if it were not also targeted for the Satmar community? It was not targeted for the Satmar community. It wasn't even targeted for the Jewish community. What I put in the book was what I felt Suri would be thinking and feeling. That's all.
There was also, Goldie, in the chat, a question about you personally and your children, and how you have, you mentioned your daughter's friends seeming more acceptant, but how have you as a parent, do you feel, guided or taught your children differently than, maybe your peers from within the community?
Well, let's start with the idea that many people in the Hasidic community don't allow their children to read secular books, and they don't allow their kids to go to the library. And at least when I first came to my children's school, there was no secular library. There were no secular books at all. And that frustrated me. And so for a start, I have over 40,000 books in my home. My home has more books than the local branch of the Chicago Public Library. That's so that my kids can read. So my kids all grew up reading. And my house was really popular with the kids who liked to read but weren't allowed to. So that's one aspect of the education that was really different, right? And were there people who said, oh, you know, I don't want my kid to go to your house because you've got all those books? Yeah, for sure. That definitely happened. But I didn't care because I'm stubborn. Some of the other things that, you know, like in terms of how did I teach them or guide them differently than most other parents as far as acceptance of social issues? So that's a really good question. And what I would say is this, besides reading and encouraging my kids to read, besides really, really pushing science with my kids, I'm a big believer on science and I know a lot about science and I wanted my kids to know it too. So I taught it to them at home. But besides that, for example, I invited all kinds of people to my home from the earliest ages. And I wanted my kids to know that everybody is the same inside, the same as I'm saying to you guys. Everybody's the same inside. We're all the same. It doesn't matter if you're gay or straight or brown or white. It doesn't matter. We're inside. We all have the same wishes and desires. We all need to be treated respectfully. We all hope to make those connections between ourselves. So that's what I did that was different.
That's an important message for us all to hear right now with everything that's happening. So do you want to tell us about your next book or what you're thinking of or what writers have influenced you? And tell us a little more. We're hungry for more.
Well, I could say one thing that I think would actually, hang on a second, let me see if I can type it in so you could all see it. I don't know how to send the chat to everybody. Oh, there we go, everyone. So we were talking about the idea of spirits and the Jewish understanding of spirits and death and dying. And I wrote a story, it's not a story, it's a true story, called The Chevra, which I'm gonna put here. And you could just Google this. This won a National Writing Award. Oop, there it is. And that actually outlines a lot about the Jewish beliefs around death and dying and after death. And it also talks a lot about my family circumstances when my mother died. And so that would actually be an interesting, I think, an adjunct and an addition to that question that was asked about what is the role of the spirit, you know, what is the role of the spirits in the book? So that's number one. And then number two, as far as what's coming, I have a book coming, which is probably not going to be titled Marguerite and Eleanor, but that's what I call it right now. And it's about two women who ended up living in New York together for 30, 40 years. And they both were peace activists. They lived around the turn of the last century, and they were, both of them were the earliest pioneers in women's education. And one of them, Eleanor, founded the chemistry department at Barnard University, so Barnard College. And she was an expert in uranium. And so during World War II, even though they were peace activists, she ended up getting roped into going to work on the Manhattan Project because, of course, she couldn't say, I'm essentially married. I can't leave now. Because of this very deep secret that they had, which is that they had lived together for so many years, and in this relationship, she was unable to protect herself from being coerced into going to work on a project that was actually the exact opposite of everything they believed in. And so that's sort of the premise of that, the story Marguerite and Eleanor. And I have a second book also finished, but in revision, which is about a Jewish spiritual commune in the far northwest of Australia. Does this sound familiar? So yes, so two interesting things. I think they're interesting.
Fabulous. And you're a busy woman. You teach as well. You have a big family. You have time, you find time to write. I'm sure.
Oh no, that, you know, anything that you get paid for you put it first. You know, you get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, you're like, I'd really like to go look in the gut. No, I'm just going to sit down and work.
Fabulous. Rachel, do you have a last question? And then we're going to wrap up the evening.
No, I think I want to just make sure we got, oh, Susan said I highly recommend Goldie's book, The Paperbark Shoe, which I also highly recommend. And actually, Goldie, when I first met you, you were speaking about The Paperbark Shoe, and you talked about your next book being this book about the Jews in Western Australia. And like, that was like 10 years. I've been like waiting for that book for 10 years. And then when On Division came out, I thought, oh, that's that book about the Jews in Australia. And then I was like, no, it's not. Like, so.
It's not. Yeah, I actually have, I have books that come out overseas that don't come out here. So I have another book that came out in Australia, actually 2 other books that came out in Australia. One is called Gwen, which is about Gwen John, an artist at turn of the century Paris that I researched for years and years and years. Interesting book, and it won, or rather was shortlisted for a bunch of very prestigious awards in Australia. So that's really cool. And I have a collection of short stories. And like, if you really like my writing, you could probably like snag one from Fremantle Press, which is the publisher in Australia.
Wonderful.
Well, but also that just tells you, like, so your book about Australia, the Jews and the Jewish community in Australia, has taken years and years and years. And then how long did it take you to write and publish On Division?
So they're all different. So something like Gwen, let's say, which is the book about Gwen John, took me probably 6 years of research and writing. Whereas On Division took me 10 days. So, you know, it's really different because I don't, you know, Gwen John, the story about Gwen John and all that information didn't just magically fall into my head. It wasn't anything that I've ever experienced before. I had to go and research it. Versus On Division, that's my life. That's everything I know. Midwifery, yep. How about schooling in the Jewish community? Yep, got that. Hasidic life, sure. Older Jewish woman, got it. Gay kid, got that too. We got it all.
Okay, thank you. You know, this has been a wonderful session. I think I'm going to basically call it a wrap. I just want to give a big thank you to you for overcoming a tornado. That's another first for our program, and showing up. Amazing.
Totally dramatic. So over dramatic.
You had all your children with you huddled in a bathroom?
Yeah, I will send you a photo. We're all sitting there like, because it's a tiny bathroom and there's all of us and we're all like, ah.
And how long did it take to pass? How long did this whole experience take?
I want to say it was like half an hour. Like I was outside watering the garden and all of a sudden I turned around and I went, oh, run! And we all ran in and then there was like just this crazy shaking and like loud, like roaring sounds. And I said, it's a tornado. That's a tornado. Oh my gosh. And then one of my kids ran to the window to look and he screamed, it is a tornado. It came roaring back and we slammed the door shut again. It's like, oh, golly.
Well, we're so honored that you still came to meet with us tonight. So thank you so much. Rachel came in. Thank you so much for always being wonderful.
Thank you.
Wonderful
thank you so much
to our programs. And Rabbi Ellen Wallace-Fields, thank you for all you do for all of our programs. As I didn't have a chance to introduce you, Goldie, but Rabbi Wallace-Fields is the Executive Director of Women's League, and she is here with us, and she is a
I made
wonderful
sure
educator.
I sent her a chat to make sure she was okay with us streaming and recording. So she got to
Okay.
know me briefly via chat. Your book was fantastic, and I'm from Brooklyn, so it brought back memories. Not quite Williamsburg, but.
Yeah,
And thank you to all our participants, and thank you for the 3 years I'm basically wrapping up as chair of Women's League REITs program.
Thank you, Vivian, for all you do.
Oh, and and thank you to all our participants who are always so wonderful and teach me so much. So this session has been recorded. It will be edited. It will be available on the Women's League website in a week or so. And it will, please tell your friends all about us. We have this is only one of dozens of wonderful programs, and we have more now during the quarantine period. We added new programs. So again, we have our More Time for Books series continuing on Tuesday, June 16th, when Rachel will be with us again and we'll talk to us about book clubs, book club favorite books, and how to enrich a discussion in a book club and how to engage with authors, wonderful things. And I ask anyone out there who is a member of a book club or leader of a book club to send me privately an email. We want to catalog who you are and how many book clubs we have within Women's League. So send me an email, bleber@wlcj.org. That's Lieber with no I. And I will put that together and share it with our team. So thank you. And Goldie, what a joy it is to meet you. We will be following everything you do from here on in.
Oh, gosh, thank you so much, everybody. I'm very grateful for the invitation and for your interest and enthusiasm. It was lovely. You're always so nice. Everybody's so nice. I'm grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. We hope to meet you again.
I hope so too.
And everyone in Women's League will see each other on Convention Day, Sunday, July 12th. Okay, good night.
Thank you all. Have a safe evening and be safe and healthy. And thank you for participating.
Thank you, Vivian, very much for all 3 years.
Everything. Fantastic.
Thank you for being part of it. Okay, so I'm going to say good night.